The fantasy football playoffs are right around the corner, and I'm providing you 10 must-stash players that you need to be adding to your roster, because if you missed out on guys like a Tyrone Tracy, a Kareem Hunt, a J.K. Dobbins as stashes earlier on in the season, there are still going to be guys that pop off and can ultimately help you win a fantasy football championship in 2024. And when we start this off, the first player that you need to be stashing, it's going to be Jonathan Brooks for the Carolina Panthers. And I understand, if there's been anybody in the fantasy football community pushing the Jonathan Brooks agenda, it has been me. But Chuba Hubbard over the last 3 to 4 weeks has absolutely slammed what felt like the Jonathan Brooks door shut. But the part that I want to hit on with Jonathan Brooks is, if you drafted him in round 7, round 8, round 9 of your fantasy football draft, you've been holding him on IR or have dropped him. But Jonathan Brooks is about to make his appearance into an NFL game on Sunday. Now, I'm not saying that Jonathan Brooks is all of a sudden going to overtake and become the ultimate level bell cow when we saw Chuba Hubbard not only get the contract extension, but ultimately has been killing it for fantasy football. This week, as Jonathan Brooks goes up against Kansas City, it's pretty rough. We don't know what this overall snap share is going to look like. Tampa Bay, Philadelphia, Dallas over the next few weeks. I'm just saying, he's right now rostered in 65% of leagues. So there's a chance that he's out there on your waiver wire, needs to be stashed. I want Jonathan Brooks at the end of my bench. Listen, there's 65% of people out there. They're probably just like me, but if you're in one of those leagues where he is about 35% available, then I would 100% be going and trying to add Jonathan Brooks to your overall squad. Next guy that honestly, I would argue probably should be stashed a little bit higher than what we're seeing with Jonathan Brooks. It's going to be Trey Benson for the Arizona Cardinals. And we've talked about Trey Benson each and every week in this video, and I'm continuing to stash Trey Benson. You need to stash Trey Benson. And the main reason you need to be stashing Trey Benson is because Trey Benson is a talented rookie level running back who has just started the expansion of taking over some snaps for our guy, James Conner. 28 and 27% snap share the last 2 weeks, and he's put up 12.5 and 10 fantasy points in full PPR. He's gotten 8 and 10 carries each of those games. And not that we're seeing Trey Benson absolutely demolish and just absolutely overtake James Conner, kind of like what Tyrone Tracy did to Devin Singletary, but I think we're going to continue to see this as they come down the line. Seattle, Minnesota, Seattle, New England, Carolina, a lot of juicy matchups for the Arizona Cardinals. And as much as James Conner the last few seasons has been a little bit healthier than early on in his career, James Conner hasn't really ever fully played a full fantasy football season. And so I'm looking at Trey Benson, I'm looking at history, and I'm saying this dude was also drafted with a high 3rd round pick. He led the team in rushing on Sunday for all it's worth. So give me some Trey Benson as my next level stash. He's a little bit, easily accessible for the masses with him only being 34% roster on Sleeper. Definitely go target some Trey Benson. My third player that you need to be stashing on your fantasy football roster, and it feels ridiculous to say because right now this week I have him as my wide receiver 24, but it's going to be Quin Johnson, who is 64% roster. Dude has put up 22, 10, and 12 fantasy points the last 3 weeks. And I understand this is not like a deep stash. So if you're playing in a super competitive league, I understand Quin Johnson's probably not going to be there. But I felt like I had to bring him up in this video, had to talk about him as a stash, because the same way that I'm looking at Jonathan Brooks, I like everything that we just talked about Jonathan Brooks and probably the upside that he has. Quin Johnson has the upside and he's actually playing and can be someone that you can put in at a flex spot or can be a depth piece on your bench. Quin Johnson loved the matchup this week versus Baltimore. And if he continues to kind of be the true alpha for Justin Herbert, we could see good things going forward with both Quin Johnson. And of course, we'd love to see what we're seeing with Ladd McConkey on that team, but Quin Johnson, great level stash. Now we get to a little bit deeper stashes from those guys going forward. And the next guy who I didn't want to have to talk about this week, I swear I've been on the Jonathan Brooks bandwagon, but I'm also riding this guy like nobody's business. It is going to be Demario Pop Douglas for the New England Patriots. And if you guys have tuned into this channel, if you're one of my subscribers, and if you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. We're on the way to 5,000 subscribers. You know that I've talked about Pop Douglas at least every week, if not every other week in this video. And so if you are here and you do not have Pop Douglas currently stashed, I don't know what you're doing. 9 fantasy points in the last 2 weeks. It hasn't been great, especially after what we saw him do in, the little bit of a stretch between week 5 to week 6 was just absolutely prime Pop Douglas. Everyone added him to their team, but it's been kind of lower after that. He's the wide receiver 47 this season. He caught 5 passes in week 11 for 59 yards, only had 9.9 fantasy points. Going forward, Pop Douglas has matchups versus Miami, versus Indy. He's got a bye in week 14, Arizona, and Buffalo. This is a team that is trying to get confidence instilled into Drake May, and Pop Douglas is his number one wide receiver weapon. You need to go add Pop Douglas. Like we said, if Trey Benson, Jonathan Brooks, and Quin Johnson are not available on waiver wires, then Pop Douglas is the fourth guy that you need to be stashing. Join the Caleb Nemi Pop Douglas fan club because it's great over here. The water's warm. We can welcome a lot more people into this overall Pop Douglas fanfare. Next guy that we need to be talking about stashing, it's going to be Cam Akers for the Minnesota Vikings. And Cam Akers has had quite the season. Takes over for Joe Mixon in a brief stretch of time early on in the season before getting cut, and then signs back with the Minnesota Vikings, who was with last season. And a lot of people were like, oh, well, that's the end of Cam Akers. Well, over the last 3 weeks, 22, 31, and 37% snap share. Last week versus Tennessee had 11.6 fantasy points, 10 attempts for 25 yards, 2 receptions for 11. He was low-key a low-end flex play. And we're talking about Aaron Jones, who's been struggling just a little bit in this offense, which is kind of cracking the door open for a guy like Cam Akers to take over. And let's not forget, Aaron Jones, as much as we talked about Trey Benson and James Conner not actually being the full bill of health throughout his career, the same can be true for Aaron Jones. Coming down the stretch, the Green Bay Packers, Chicago, Arizona, Atlanta, Chicago, Seattle, some decent matchups there for Cam Akers. He's only rostered in 28% of the league. So like we said, if these guys ahead of him, I prefer everyone that I talked about ahead. This is in the order that I would be trying to get them and stash them on my team. Cam Akers is a guy you need to be stashing. You got to feel pretty good about Cam Akers going forward. Like we said, there's no, besides Aaron Jones ahead of him, we're not scared about Ty Chandler. And this team has been passing the ball. They've cooled off a little bit from that super hot start that they had earlier on the season with Sam Darnold, but I still feel very good about Cam Akers. The next guy we're going to talk about stashing, it is going to be John Meche for the Houston Texans. And John Meche, week 10, had 18 fantasy points. Week 11 only had 6. And John Meche is somebody that we love the story. There's a great story of him absolutely battling cancer to be able to get out here and play football. We do know Nico Collins last week had that huge touchdown catch and then was out for the rest of the game. So really it's the Nico Collins, Tank Dell, and even though Tank Dell has been the wide receiver 2, wide receiver 1 some weeks, he hasn't been putting up great fantasy football numbers. John Meche is a guy that I think potentially has a little bit of sneaky value. So if you're in a deeper league, like I said, he's 7% rostered. I wanted to provide some players that are definitely available out there for everybody. John Meche is out there available for everyone. So if you're in a little bit deeper of a league, there's a chance that you're going to tell me, Caleb, leave John Meche on the waiver wire. I hear it. But I do think the upside with them versus Tennessee, Jacksonville, Miami, Kansas City over the next 4 out of 5 weeks, you got to feel really good about where John Meche is sitting, at least with schedule wise. And like we said, Tank Dell has been super underperforming. So just trying to get some more wide receiver options for you available because the wide receivers as a whole this year just have not been good. Next guy we're going to talk about, it's going to be Devontae Vil for the Denver Broncos, and he's only 10% rostered. Last week had 10.6 fantasy points. The week before that had 13.9. This week going up against Vegas, I think you could argue, Caleb, I prefer to have Devontae Vil over John Meche. I think that's a question mark to be had. Like I said, Courtland Sutton's been absolutely balling for this team. Devontae Vil is starting to really overtake Marvin and Mims with a 66 and 68% snap share the last 2 weeks. Go target some Devontae Vil. It's 26 out of the University of Utah, 6'5", 210. We know Courtland Sutton is the true one in this overall offense, so I'm not over here saying, oh, Devontae Vil is going to be the alpha. Like, I get it. He's not going to be the alpha at all, but Devontae Vil is 100% a guy that you need to be targeting. I think there is some good value with Devontae Vil as a stash, and we are moving quick here, and we got 3 more stashes to be providing for you. Next guy we're going to be talking about, it is going to be Blake Corum out to the University of Michigan. Boo all to all of us Ohio State fans, but Blake Corum is 21% rostered, and we've seen Kyren Williams really start to struggle this season, but Blake Corum the last 2 weeks has had a 7 and 19% snap share, getting some run, which it's been a small uptick in usage, but it's enough for me to say, pretty much since week 7, like we said, we've been hoping to see Blake Corum out there on the NFL field really start to overtake that RB2 role. There was talk earlier this season that Ronnie Rivers was the clear 2. Well, now it's Blake Corum. And as much as Kyren Williams in this offense hasn't been the most efficient level season, it hasn't been the superstar season that Kyren Williams put up last season that was absolutely winning. If something were to happen to Kyren Williams, which I know we talked about like with Trey Benson and Jonathan Brooks, we understand these guys are all kind of handcuffs. I think the upside's 100% there for a guy like Blake Corum going forward. So he's only 21% roster, so he's a little bit more rostered than Meche, more rostered than Vale, but I do think Blake Corum, if things potentially went in a sour direction for this team, Blake Corum could definitely have some value as we head into the fantasy football playoffs. Next guy we're going to talk about, it's going to be Jaylen Wright, who's 15% rostered out of the Miami Dolphins camp, and we know that it's the Devon a chain. It is the Raheem Mostert show. These guys are the RB1 and RB2, put up 1.6 fantasy points, 26% snap share in week 11. We are seeing this offense start to get it going. There is some life there. We saw before they went on bye. So this is all the week back in week 5, 8.6 fantasy points. Jaylen Wright, super explosive, super fast 40-yard dash time. We're talking about a Dolphins backfield that likes to run two guys, and Devon and Raheem have not ever, but either of them, been able to fully maintain health. And so I understand risking it for injuries. I have plenty of Devon, I have plenty of Raheem, so I'm not just risking talking about injuries with these guys, but I 100% believe that Jaylen Wright, if he were to be given an opportunity as an RB2, absolutely league winner on your fantasy football roster. And the next team that we're going to be talking about as a stash, and maybe this is a little bit late to be talking about them as a stash, but it's going to be the Tampa Bay Buccaneers defense. I like to give you guys a defense that you can go stash because hopefully they will provide some value later on down the line. I mean, we're talking about them this week against Giants, Carolina next week, the Vegas Raiders in week 14, and then the Chargers in week 15. So really for the next 3-week stretch, I think Tampa Bay should be an awesome defense. They're 61% roster, so they're in a few leagues. They are out there. Definitely go target some Tampa Bay if you haven't already. But if you like fantasy football, if you like winning, if you like stashes, hit that like and subscribe button on the way to 5,000 subscribers. Check out these 2 videos if you haven't, and I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.